So this is my 2008 Honda Civic Si. I've had this car since '08. It's basically as old as my marriage. It's been through quite a few different builds. It's made as much as 900 wheel horsepower when it was had a fully built engine in it. Now it's got a stock block in it. I parted the build out because I wasn't sure what I was going to do with the car. Well, I still kept it, and I really do enjoy driving this '08 Si. It's probably my favorite generation of Honda Civic. I wanted to kind of update it because a lot of the car is dated. It just feels dated, and it's always been on a MoTeC M150 ECU. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about what the MoTeC M150 can do on the car, because that's already, I think, pretty well known. And since this car's been on that ECU, I've been using it exclusively for a long time. What I wanted to do is kind of freshen up what the interior of the car looks like, and the big thing for me was the instrument cluster. Still got the factory navigation, all that works, but the instrument cluster felt kind of bland. So I put a MoTeC C127 display in it, and then the FD2 Type R top cluster. But I kind of wanted to keep it looking retro, looking like a Civic Si cluster, but add all the cool new things that you can do with the M150 ECU that's in the car, while retaining all the OEM functionality. The big thing is obviously we can toggle stability control with the button still. You still have the ability to change the instrument cluster from mile an hour to kilometer an hour. That does work and works correctly. The fuel level gauge obviously works, which is information being sent from the instrument cluster. And that's the big thing, is the instrument cluster is what is known as a gateway in the car. Essentially, it's responsible for forwarding information, messages, dials, and so forth back to other modules in the car, including the upper instrument cluster. So that's the big challenge in making this MoTeC C127 display integrating completely with the car. Is I wanted all my dimmer control to work, and as you can see, dimmer control functions, the lights and indicators work, and the dimmer switches based on the lights being on and off. I pull the e-brake down, that disappears. Opening the door brings the indicator up. If I unclip my seat belt, that brings the indicator up. Some of the more important things, like if I pop the trunk lid, it'll give me the indicator for that as well. But some of the other things that we've been able to add on top of that is obviously the engine information. You've got the instrument cluster with the TAC functioning, and right in the middle you can see the boost gauge as well, since this is a turbo Civic. And you can see the little green arrow will go up and down to indicate what boost we're targeting, and as we get under power, it will the boost gauge will come up to meet that. Traction control does mode switching, so I hold the cruise cancel button and you can see the traction control indicator shows where I am as far as the adjustment goes. We got a couple of important pieces of information like coolant temperature, fuel pressure, IAT, lambda, which is your AFR gauge, all integrated. But the other cool thing is if I turn the wipers on, I can adjust the wiper speed and I get a gauge indicating what I'm doing with the wipers, whether it's in slow mode, fast mode, or in interval mode. If we turn on the launch control, get an indicator the launch control is engaged, and once you build boost it'll say go and you can take off. The one item that you may miss if you remove the factory instrument cluster is AC control. So this AC knob is actually sent to the ECU, and the ECU is requested to turn on the AC based on the instrument cluster sending that to the ECU. So when you remove the factory instrument cluster, you would lose that capability, but you do not with this gauge cluster, because we've retained that functionality by doing additional custom programming. The MoTeC gauge functions correctly. The select gauge button here will go through and let us pick what trip we're on, whether to show the odometer, the mile per gallon, average mile per hour for that trip, and the amount of distance that's been traveled. So I've already reset trip B. Trip A hasn't been reset yet, but I can hold the button. If I release it, it'll cancel the reset, but if I hold it, it'll go ahead and reset the fuel economy for me. Then I can go to trip B, do it again, and then trip B was showing no miles per gallon because I had used a bunch of fuel idling, but never had actually driven the car. You do get a distance to empty and instantaneous readout, some of the other kind of cool, more modern features that you have on more modern cars in the instrument cluster. Your instrumentation in this area. So when you turn the lights on with cars, you still retain the illumination control.